recognised. The next speaker is the General Secretary of the Socialist Party, Peter Taaffe.
Comrade Chair and comrades, last year when we stood up here on this platform at Socialism, we predicted that the working class, under the hammer blows of the worst economic and social crisis since the 1930s, would inevitably move into opposition to this system. We were met with pessimism, as we have been before, sometimes with outright scorn. And you know the pessimism was on full display the other night on Newsnight when they were discussing the FBU strike. And there's old Jeremy Paxman, that is, pontificating along with a professor about the disappearance of the working class, pondering the fact that things are not the same as they were during the miners' strike, that the miners had power, they went on strike, but today, railway workers, firefighters and others have mortgages and they can't afford to go out on strike. We heard the same thing, by the way, on the eve of the Titanic strike of the miners in 1984. Civil servants and others have come out on strike and joined, as Cindy pointed out, really the heavy battalions of the working class. The life itself is always a test of ideas. And this particular idea, that the working class are acquiescent in the teeth of the attacks that have been made upon them, is false from beginning to end. Ask Sarkozy in France. Ask Papandreou in Greece. Sarkozy said when he came to power, I am going to banish the spectre of the 1968 general strike, when 10 million workers occupied the factories and had the ruling class by the throat, and their fingers were prized away from them by the leaders of the Socialist Party and the Communist Party at that time. What is the situation in France today? There are 5 general strikes on one day, a total, an immense total of 17.5 million working men and women marched through the streets in a demonstration of unparalleled working class power in the course of the last period. We've had the Titanic upsurge in Greece that Andros will spell out in his contribution. We've had 25,000 students marching out into the centre of Dublin as a dress rehearsal for what's going to happen in Britain with the revolt of the youth against the terrible impositions that have been imposed upon them by this government itself. The Channel separates us from France, but socially, politically and economically, France is coming to Britain in the next period. The sheer horror of the brutal attacks of this government, I don't need to spell out. Just one fact, indicated in the press in the last week, about 500,000 of the most unfortunate members of this society, the disabled, the handicapped and so on, who are to be inflicted with the idea that they must go out to work. Here in The Guardian, there's the example of James, who's blind, deaf, can't walk or talk, yet is being deemed, quote, fit for work by the new system. This entitles him to only £53 a week. It's the horrors of the 1930s, worse by the way, the horrors of Dickensian Britain of the Victoria period that are going to be visited on the working class itself. The anger and the bitterness of working class people is palpable, but you would not think so when you listen to the speeches of the summit of the movement itself. This is Dave Prentice, the leader of UNICEF at the TUC conference. And listen to his bold words. If the government doesn't listen to us today, they won't have heard the last of us. Even a bourgeois journalist, The Guardian, says, not exactly storming the Bastille, is it? You don't gauge what's happening in Britain by the summits of the movement. The General Secretary of the TUC is talking about negotiations, of a dialogue. With whom? With the butchers. The dialogue is taking place over a gap that's wider than the Grand Canyon in the US. That's the class divide that exists in Britain at this particular moment in time. And you're proposing a dialogue, Mr. Barber, at a time when the capitalists are coming for the FBU, when we heard from Matt Rank about the strike-breaking measures of this firm, when the RMT, according to the Evening Standard, we have the city editor writing, perhaps somewhere in the north of England, on a soon-to-close RAF base, a group of simulators for the different routes could be established to teach a standing workforce how to drive and manage London Underground trains. That's not the language of dialogue, that's the language of bitter class war. The government doesn't need to talk about the class war because they're too busy practicing it against the working class